for a parent, the trajectory of a child's education is the parent, and we shouldn't forget that. We prefer in this district an individualized approach. If you have a child that is having difficulty with one of the millions of things they can have difficulty with, we apply what we call differentiated instruction in a system called MTSS, Multi-Tiered Systems and Supports, to reach out to that kid in their areas of difficulty and help them. That's the goal. What is our role as a board with respect to this issue and with respect to similar issues is to speak up. We find our legislatures and wag our fingers at them and say, no, 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 let's not do that. So I'm opposed to the concept, but I think we're stuck with it probably.
Thank you. And Lori.
Being an educator, it's hard to say that at every grade level that student has to be up to that grade level, reading at a third grade level that we're talking about and speaking about. In education, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. Some of these students are coming from very different backgrounds, and we're working as educators with numerous people in the building, intervention coaches, and working on the MTSS, the multi-tiered system of support, to bring these students along. And research shows that if we're holding these students back, there can be some definite effects to that for that child. So that one size fits all does not work in education. It doesn't work, and we want our students obviously to be readers and do well in math. But to say that at third grade, if they're not reading at third grade, they're all going to stay back, that would mean a lot of kids in many, many districts. And then it just kind of perpetuates itself, and then those are held back, and those are held back. We have systems of support in place that can work with these students that need the extra support.
Thank you. And thank you all for doing your best to stay within the timelines. We appreciate that. So Cindy, the next question will start with you. Recently, the Michigan State Board of Education passed guidelines for allowing school children to choose which locker room to use based on their preferred gender at the time, rather than their biological gender. How do you propose, as a current Board of Education member or future Board of Education member, with this legislation? What is your thoughts or opinion on the guidelines, and how would you support or oppose this policy?
Good question. Very difficult question to answer. I will tell you now that what we are doing in our buildings is on a case-by-case basis. We are working with parents to make sure that their student is comfortable in whichever locker room that they choose. It's a very difficult decision. As you know, the federal government has told us if we do not follow their mandates that they will pull federal funding, which is a little bit of a gas because, again, we always have funding issues. I don't know how I feel about it, quite frankly. I think that there are individual instances in every case, and to make a cookie-cutter decision based on what we're going to do, I think is unfortunate. If the government ties our hands and makes us do it the same way every time, I think we're going to do more harm to that child. We're going to do more harm to the students in that building, and I really don't know what the right answer is. I am perplexed by it, and as long as our students here can work with administration and have it run smoothly, I know that we're going to run into that stop sign very soon with a decision that needs to be made, and I don't know what I'm going to make.
Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you. Another really hot button and timely issue to be raised. So you're putting us to our paces here. I think that Cindy reflects probably the pulse of the board as a whole. We recently did talk about this in committee of the whole, and really look to and lean on our administrators to give us feedback about what is actually going on in the schools, because you have to understand, we sit at a policy level where we're talking about multi-millions of dollar budgets, and we're talking about individual students and individual teachers. So there's a lot in between. This is, I can't think of a more sensitive issue to the people that are caught up in it. I can't think what I would do in this situation, faced with perhaps a child that was questioning these things. I mean, these are very, very personal and intimate discussions, and like Cindy, we haven't had, I will just say, we haven't had to address a specific instance, and I think that it doesn't behoove anybody for us to say, again, like my last answer, there's a line, and it's a black line, and one and the other, and to make a one-size-fits-all determination. I think this is an issue that takes a lot of sensitivity and individualized attention.
Thank you. Matt?
Thank you. This is a difficult issue. Again, the MDE in Washington say jump, and we are forced to ask how high. There were 13,000 comments submitted to Lansing, almost uniformly negative against this policy. The MDE nonetheless rolled out something that they thought was better for us than we thought is better for us. The biggest flaw in the state guidance is the lack of parental input. If my child is having difficulty with any one of the myriad issues, I would expect me to be not only intimately involved, but also the ultimate driver in the decisions involving that child. They're still minors. They're not 18. They don't get to decide on their own whether their difficulties have reached an insurmountable level. We pride ourselves on individualized plans. If there's a child having a difficulty in any sort of thing, we bring the parents in, the vast resources of this district, apply them to the child and try to figure out what's best. We do have to look out as a board for the interests of all of our students, not just the student or students that are impacted by this particular thing. As far as federal rewriting of Title IX on their own, I think we'll pass on that, and we'll wait for somebody to tell us more specifically where the authority lies to rewrite that piece of legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Lori?
This definitely is a sensitive issue, and I'd like to think that, I know that the board and the board and the administration have had conversations about it that I've heard, and there has to be a strong communication between the parent as well as the child, and us just being sensitive to those issues and making sure that really all the students that are involved that go to the school and attend the school, that we can bring some comfort to all levels, not only the student that is choosing what locker room to use, but all the other students involved. So there has to be some strong communication with everyone, and everyone has to be kind of on board and understand what's happening.
Thank you. Scott?
I definitely think that this is a challenging topic. It's definitely very fluid, and I think that we're really at the beginning stage of what this is really going to mean over the next couple of years. I have two children, a son in 3rd grade, a daughter in 4th grade, and as a parent, I must be completely frank. I am concerned that, my daughter could be sharing a locker room with somebody that she really shouldn't be. So I also agree it's a very sensitive topic. You want to understand, you want to be empathetic to the others, to the people that are going through some difficult situations. At the same time, I think we have to protect families. I think we have to protect the children of families as well. And I think that there are some special interest groups that are involved, and that makes me concerned. So I haven't formed a solid decision either way, but I am concerned with the direction that this is moving. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question will go to Sarah. Often as a Board of Education member, you are confronted with confrontational issues, such as literature books that are often proposed in classes. Can you discuss what is your thought process that you would use to determine if a book is allowed or not allowed? And if you are an existing BOE member or you have voted on that, if you would also share if you have voted on previous literature opinions, such as The Bluest Eye by Nobel laureate Toni Morrison.
Sure. Thank you for that question. I don't think it's possible, probably, to improve on what the Founding Fathers said when they established our country with the concept of majority rules with minority rights. I think that we have to, as a district, look at what the majority wants, but we can't just sit on the folks that we may not agree with or that may challenge us. And so sort of that's a big picture view of how I look at things. I think you have to take both into consideration and use your judgment, bottom line. With regard to the Bluest Eye, and I think every other board member on both the the committee of the whole vote, which was the first vote, and then the later board vote, all voted in favor of keeping that text in the curriculum. There are lots of reasons why, but my particular ones had to do with what I thought was best for our children, and in particular, the results and what they were going to have to go face the next time they took a college board test. As it turned out, the very next college board test had the Bluest Eye on it, and our kids were able to confront that text, having come from a position of this board selected, maintaining that text in our curriculum, and that was what animated my vote on that particular issue.
Thank you. Matt?
Thanks, that's a great question. It was a challenging issue, and I think we came to the proper resolution by going back to the principle of having the parents involved. There were probably 200 people in this room objecting to and supporting the book, and what I laid out and what Sarah and I laid out at the meeting in relative detail was that we were not going to let one group tell the other group what to do. That's how the system works. The parents get to decide. If they think that the book's passages were too mature, they were very, very offensive, they could opt out of that book and choose a similar text. If the parent thought that the book was of significant literary value, it was on the test, they let us know that it would possibly be on the test, and they want their child to read it, so shall it be. It's not up to this board or this district to either ban or mandate books. That's done again at the parental level. The parents were given access to the offending passages and were able to make their own determination on whether that book was appropriate or not.
Thank you. Lori?
I did come to that meeting, and this room was packed, and I stood in that back corner there, and I listened to all the fors and against the book. I think as a board member, I think you're obligated to take a look at whatever material it is that people have in question. It is your job to be reading it and seeing what opinion you're forming, but also to be a good listener on the board and hear what the community has to say, and the parents that deal directly with that book and those types of literature pieces. And giving options to parents to opt out of something is essential. It is really essential. And some people have personal issues against something and they don't want their child reading it. That's fine. There's other options that we can give them for an AP class that they could read instead of a particular book.
Thank you.
As an author of 11 published books and as a dedicated library volunteer, I think I bring a unique perspective to this topic. From my perspective, just because you take dozens of pages of written content, you slap on a cover, you put an ISB on it, and you give it a publication date, does not mean that parents lose rights to determine which periodicals are age appropriate for their children. Personally, I don't think that this book is age appropriate for high school or middle school children. There are probably dozens, if not hundreds, of books that are not on the shelves in the high school or the middle school because they are not age appropriate. I think that perhaps politics has allowed this to get way out of hand. So no, as a board, I think you probably made a decent decision on that. I probably would have pushed to have swapped out that book for a book that was more age appropriate and a book that has a higher degree of testing on the AP Lit. This book is somewhere around 70 on the list of the most tested books for AP from 1970 to 2014. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think you asked me what I would do as a school board member to prepare to respond. I'll tell you what I did. I went out and got the book and I read it. I thought it was important for me as a board member to know what the content of the book was. I immediately called Mr. Koski and said, need a copy, and I went right out and got it. I also, as the question evolved, it came to light that this book was an AP course that was slated for seniors the last semester of their senior year. So obviously, they're almost ready to go to college. It is a college-level book. And looking at the the student base that's going to be reading the book, I felt it was appropriate for them to read this book in preparation to go on to college. Now, that doesn't mean it should be mandated for them to read. It still is a family decision, and that's what the board did. We resolved it by setting into a more transparent process of making the reading list available on all of our levels, and to make sure that the parents are fully versed on what is being read. They have the summer to read it, and then they can make those decisions whether they would like to keep maybe what they feel a controversial book is in the curriculum for their student to read, or they can go to to a B list and find an equally challenging book, but maybe not of the language or the culture that's is in the other book. But it helped us resolve that transparency process that we needed to put into place, and I think that's the greatest result of this whole book discussion, is that we now have a new process in place for our parents.
Thank you. And this will be the last question of the night, and it will go to Matt, starting. What are, in your opinions, are the areas of concern for the district in the next 2 to 3 years?
That's a great question. The biggest issue over the next 2 to 3 years is that we have to continue to focus on the amount of funding that we do or do not get from the state. You may think that your local tax dollars go from your pocket to our district. They do not. They go to Lansing first, and then Lansing figures out how much money they want to give us. That's a fluctuating number as our enrollment fluctuates, which is probably the second most important area of focus. We have to continue to drive programming, to drive students to our district. We've done a wonderful job so far. We're plus 40 this year over last year, which is a vast improvement. We've added over the last 3 years, but we have to continue to do that. If we don't, we lose money. If we lose money, we cut programs, and we're having conversations at this table about whether we're going to cut this or cut that, which are much worse conversations, I can assure you. There is a huge bubble standing over public finance. It's called your public pensions. There's a 30-plus cents on the dollar, now goes back to the state of Michigan for every dollar we spend on salaries. We're having to cover a hole from many, many years ago. So the two issues I would say are financial and enrollment.
Thank you. Lori?
The two issues that I think are going to come up and continue to come up definitely are the funding that we're receiving from the state. That is always fluctuating, so you always have to look at that and how you're going to allocate funds in the district. The other thing that I think we need to look at, and having sat through meetings, is some of the building issues that are coming up as the buildings get older and they age. We have to take a look at some of those things and see how much it's costing to heat things, how much it's costing to revamp something and do things with the school. So I definitely think looking at some of the building issues that are going to come up in the next couple of years is going to be very important.
Thank you.
I think there's three challenges that we could have in the next couple of years. One actually might surprise you. So number one, of course, the common theme is resource allocation. We have a limited budget, so we have to prioritize to those areas that can drive academic achievement. Of course, there's some talk now about Hillside and the future of that structure going forward, so that's going to be a big